Maybe you've been around that person who they seem to have a keen awareness for when things are not exactly the way they want them to be. I don't just mean somebody who can kind of spot the obvious, but I mean they know exactly when there's a problem that's not to their liking. Maybe it's how fast the other cars are driving in the lane beside them, or the one person in front of them who won't speed up enough for them to get out of the way, or maybe it's the way you park. There's just not enough space between the cars, or maybe it's the way they do their job. There's too much food at your desk. There's not enough paperwork at your desk. You don't answer enough questions. But there's always something that they can point out that you're doing wrong or that could be done better, and usually it's something that is to their dislike. That's the reason they point it out. Not because it's right or wrong. It really doesn't fall into that context. It annoys them. It's disappointing to them. It frustrates them. It's not their way. And I think we all know somebody like that, at least one or two somebodies like that. And here's my question for you today. Is that being able to point out that there's something they dislike, is that leadership? Is that a trait of leadership? That's what I want to talk about today on Leading Leaders. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders podcast, and I think when we encounter someone who's really good at pointing out the faults of others, there are a lot of times that we see that person in management. We recognize that they've been promoted to that position, and I guess sometimes we equate that because they have the title manager position, supervisor position, the leadership position, the person in charge position, that those traits go together. Because they've been promoted to that spot, it must be because they're so good at pointing out the flaws in other people. Let me just tell you that that's not necessarily it. In fact, sometimes a leader is completely outside the organization and they go a little bit further than just saying, hey, I don't like it like that. If you've ever met someone or worked with someone who's just a complainer in general, they whine about everything, they're never satisfied with anything, that type of person, whether they have a management, leadership, or supervisory title or not, that type of person usually has one characteristic to that trait that doesn't make them a great leader. It just makes them a great complainer or pointer-outer. Andy Andrews has a great book called The Noticer. And the book is a really good observation of, or the powers of observation. It's about watching the things that are going on around you and catching the finer details. That's different than a noticer who has nothing other to do than to complain. Someone who notices your every flaw and points them out, they may have an entirely different agenda. But that by itself is not leadership. Noticing that you've done something wrong, that's not leadership. And it's not leadership to say, well, so-and-so could have done it better, or I think you didn't do it right because it didn't please me, or you didn't do it right because it didn't meet my standard, or you didn't do it right because that's not the way I would have done it. That kind of stops short as well of leadership. See, I believe leadership has the ability to go the next step. It's not just to say, hey, that's a problem, or I didn't like the way you did this, or that work was incomplete. While all of those are a really good launching point, here's what many people miss. Identifying not just when there's a problem, but what was the problem? What are the differentiations between the causes of the problem and the symptoms of the problem? And then here's a better one. You got to go one step further if you're a good, solid leader. What are some possible solutions? How do we solve the problem going forward? Now, as I always do, I'm going to give you a quick illustration of my own example, because that's where I learned the most. That's where I observed the most. And it's, well, frankly, it's where I know my experience is hard for anybody else to question. So you can look it up in the books to validate it later. But let me tell you what happened in my own life. I find that's a very solid way to experience life and to teach from it. It's the reason I teach story power, by the way, because if you can tell a story that you lived through, you've got all the evidence that you need. Now, sometimes your observations are wrong and your anecdotes are misplaced, but that's what learning story power is all about. So here's my story. I go to meet my wife for dinner last night after I've been going nonstop since midday Thursday. So yes, today is my nap day. Mondays are my recovery day because my weekends are insane. But as I go to meet her for dinner, we called ahead. We were driving an hour and a half back from our last event to meet her. We told her where we wanted to meet. We told her what time we thought we'd be there based on our map GPS. And she went ahead of us, got a seat to place the order, and the whole 9 yards. Well, I walked in and sat down and I said, I am so hungry. I'm so ready to eat. And she said, well, it took 10 minutes before my server even acknowledged that I was here enough to wipe down the table that I was seated at. I said, well, what about the drinks? She said, literally just took the drink order. I'm like, we texted you like 40 minutes ago, 48 minutes ago, according to the text messages. 48 minutes is not enough time to get here, sit down and order. She said, oh, I've been here. And I was ready to order, but he won't take my order. And I was like, that seems a little odd. Of course, maybe it's just observation. Maybe he's really, really busy. Maybe it's bias. I don't know. So I said, well, which one's our server? And she points out the individual. Well, I can see the individual from where I'm at, leaning against the doorpost between the kitchen and the serving floor, doing nothing, just standing there. A couple of minutes into me staring at him, he finally decides to walk over to the table, looks at me as if I've said something offensive right out of the box and goes, can I help you with something? I said, well, we texted her our order like 45 minutes ago, so we figured she had already ordered the food, but we haven't ordered yet. He said, oh, so you're ready to order? We texted her our order 45 minutes. Yeah, we are more than ready to order. We've been ready to order since before you got to work today. Yes, ready to order. We would like to order. Finally, he takes our order, kind of. Every step of the way, he's got an argument. Well, we'd like to have this. Well, we don't have any shredded cheese. Okay. Do you have alternatives for the shredded cheese that's missing? Or does that mean you just wipe out half your menu because you don't have shredded cheese to put on it? So I start giving him options. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? What about this? Finally, we come to a solution on the one item for one person at the table to get their order. Move on to the next one. Have to re-explain how the order is actually being taken. I want it like this. People who don't understand that tend to do it like this. I'd rather have it like this. Fine, gets that, moves to the next person. They place their order, and then again he says, sorry, we can't make that. We're out of shredded cheese. And I looked at him for a second, and I said, so you're telling me that you completely took the item off the menu because one ingredient in the item is not available? Let me ask you this. What if I wanted to order it without cheese on a regular day? How would you make it then? He's like, well, it's been 86 from the system. I can't even order it. I'm like, you can't just like punch a button and say with no cheese and they won't make it? He said, no, it's been 86 from the system. Grabs a menu for the person at my table and hands it to him. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's no workarounds for this? There's no solution at all just because you're out of shredded cheese? Are you beginning to sense my frustration? See, this isn't just an observation that he was slow to the table. But we can add to it, drinks didn't get refilled without specifically asking, even when delivering food to the table, which came in exactly the reverse order of the way that the order was placed, also came with almost a 15-minute gap between meal number 1 and meal number 2 and 3. And meal number 2 was intentionally being held while it was getting cold, waiting for meal number 3, which was the first meal that was ordered. Oh my gosh! What is going on back there? Meanwhile, he served food to 3 other tables, but never returned to their tables to refill their drinks. Now, see, this sounds like just me whining and complaining. And if all I did was whine and complain and refuse to tip him and talked amongst my table about the problem, that would be a different thing. But see, it so happens that we're regulars in this particular restaurant. And so I flagged down the girl who's our favorite server at that restaurant, by far the tops, also one of the trainers, imagine that. Flagged her down and asked her the question, is he new? Is he having a bad day? Give me some reason to cut him some slack on this and not just say he's doing a horrible job. And she said, no, he's not new. And I trained him and he knows better. He just doesn't seem to care. We get on to him on a regular basis about this, that, and the other. No silverware on the table, no napkins to the table, didn't wipe off the table, really slow with drinks, doesn't refill them until you ask for them. I mean, the list just went on and on and on and on and on. And that was just between me and the server. Well, at one point during the course of the meal, I specifically asked him to see a manager. I said, could you ask the manager to come by my table? Well, genius that he is, he decides to have the conversation with his manager on the sales floor in eyesight. Has his little conversation, gives his whole spiel to her, walks back to my table and says, well, your order had been 86, but the manager is going to override that and let you order what you want. Then turns around to walk away from the table. I'm like, hang on, that's not a complete order. We asked for that, but that comes with sides. Would you like to know what those sides are? And anything else that we would like to have with that, we'd like to have a cup of queso with that since you don't have any shredded cheese. And see, these are not complicated things. These are conscientious things. So when the server, who is the trainer, who is a friend of ours, said to me, did you ask for the manager? I said, I did, and this is what I saw. She said, well, that's a manager in training. Would you like to talk to the GM? And I said, well, I don't want to bother her about it. It really is disappointing as often as we come in here to be treated like this. And she said, well, let me get the manager. So the manager came and sat down with us, and I explained everything I explained to you. And I said, I'm not sure if this is a conscientious thing or if it's a training thing or if this just isn't the job for him. And we had a nice long discussion, probably 15 minutes, about the character of the person, the way they handled things, the things that they said, the things they didn't say. See, here's what I didn't do. I didn't just say to her, well, this was wrong and this was wrong and this was wrong and this was wrong. I made some observations about the conversations, about the procedure of things, about how it worked out, and how, as a leader, I would have handled that a little differently. I didn't tell her what I do. I didn't ask her if she understood who I am. None of that was relevant. What was relevant was, these are the details of what went wrong and how they could have been corrected. And with any encouragement, hopefully the next time we go in there, if this gentleman is our server, he'll have a little different attitude about serving. My whole point is this, though. It's one thing to be a whiner and a complainer, to notice when there's a problem and be done with it. It's a whole different thing to try to get to the root causes of the problem, to identify the difference between the symptoms and the causes, and then to offer some solutions to fix it. I believe that's what a good leader does, whether it's in your house, so to speak, the people that you lead, or it's in influence of others. If you're a leader and you can speak leader to leader, if you're a manager and you can speak manager to manager, then do that. Don't just whine and complain about the problem. Don't just observe that there is a problem. Invest in finding a solution for that problem, because that'll make everybody better in the end. If all you can do is whine and complain, then follow Dale Carnegie's rule. Don't criticize, condemn, and complain. If you can offer solutions, then as a leader, you should do that. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.